This is the first video of a few videos that I'd like to record introducing you to the idea of XML and how XML is created and some of the ways in which it is co-evolved with HTML. So at a high level, you should know that many user interface designs are expressed through XML or XML-like languages. XML is used for more than just user interface design, but it's a foundation of a way in which data is expressed in many different venues and many different places in computer science and computing. By understanding XML, it's going to help you with web development because many of the files that we work with in web development are based on XML. It'll help in debugging network problems if we encounter XML when we are transferring data. And it will help in future-proofing you against new technologies that will come in the future that will be based on XML. Knowing how XML is formed will help you to be grounded when these new ideas and new formulations are introduced. So let's start with what XML stands for. XML is 3 letters, it's an acronym sort of, that stands for Extensible Markup Language. It is one of many different places where you'll see the ML show up in acronyms, standing for markup language. For example, HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language. HTML, of course, is the web's core language for creating content for everyone to use anywhere, and that from the W3C organization. So what's the relationship of the two? Well, let's talk a little bit about the history of HTML in particular. HTML traces its roots back to 1989. Tim Berners-Lee is credited with the invention of the World Wide Web, and that entailed HTML as its publishing language. HTML was based on a previous generation of markup language called SGML, and SGML had this idea of separating data from the presentation of that data. Yet it didn't have any hypertext the way HTML did. In 1993, the Mosaic browser was released. The Mosaic browser is one of the very first browsers that was able to take HTML files and then render them so that people could see them, see the content presented to them in the way that we've come to know now. In 1994, the World Wide Web Consortium was formed. The World Wide Web Consortium, of which Tim Berners-Lee was an integral part, became the standards body for which many of the languages, for example HTML, and other protocols that the World Wide Web uses were standardized so that all browsers could work off the same data and so that the many different organizations that exist in the world could interchange data effectively. In 1995, HTML 2.0, one of the first standards of HTML, was published by the Internet Engineering Task Force. And in 1995, shortly after that, Internet Explorer was released. Internet Explorer was a competitor to the Mosaic browser. The Mosaic browser eventually became Netscape, the company in the browser, and Netscape eventually became Firefox. There's quite a story between the competition between Microsoft Internet Explorer and Netscape that hinged on a moment when Microsoft decided to release Internet Explorer as a free program, causing any organization, in particular Netscape, that was trying to compete by making money by selling the browser to not be able to compete after all. So Internet Explorer was released in 1995. 1997, W3C published HTML 3.2 in 99, 4.01, a pretty major milestone in the HTML language development. In 2000, we had the XHTML standard released. XHTML was a merger of the XML language and the HTML language. More recently, in 2010, the HTML5 draft standard was released, and in 2014, HTML5 was finalized on October 28, 2014. All part of the W3C, which is the organization that standardizes HTML. So XML and HTML have had a bit of a rocky relationship. I would characterize XML as coming from more of a theoretical or a academic standpoint, and HTML being generated more by practitioners and people who were more interested in getting the technology out there. Academic researchers did a lot of work in formalizing the XML language, and they came together with the XHTML standard, which was a standard which was both HTML and XML at the same time. Since then, HTML5 has continued to evolve, and strictly speaking, it isn't XML, although it's very, very close. What is HTML5? Well, HTML5, as this quote from the communications of the ACM tells us, is most often thought of broadly to include new versions of the markup language itself and its associated standard for accessing and manipulating HTML documents, the document object model. Cascading style sheets, or CSS, which is a language to define the presentation and appearance of an HTML document, and JavaScript, a scripting language. The term, HTML5, is often used even more broadly to include specific application programming interfaces, such as those that enable new browser-based graphics, geolocation, local storage, and video capabilities. So from that, we see that HTML5 is a lot of things, but it is definitely the evolution of the web publishing language. In it, it included support for SVG, which is vector graphics, and MathML, which is like LaTeX language for making math formulas. Some new tags were added to HTML5 that had some semantic meaning that wasn't present before. For example, a tag for section or a tag for article. If you were a newspaper, you could put an article markup in your document. It added multimedia processing, for example, a canvas tag for doing bitmapped sections of a web page, and video and audio for presenting video and audio content. Some tags were deleted, and also in addition to that, HTML5 included capabilities for offline storage, drag and drop from within and out of the browser, as well as document editing. Currently, as this is being filmed, HTML status is at 5.2, which is a revision of 5.1, which in itself was a revision of 5. It's currently a W3C working draft standard, just minor modifications from the 5.0 standard. Three different kinds of files that are very similar are XML, HTML, and JSON, which we'll touch on in the future. These are all structured data formats that have evolved with the web and with the creation of web applications. Each of them is just text with a particular syntax that's applied. They can represent a wide variety of different kinds of information. And the reason they exist is because they enable data transport. They enable different systems, different technologies, and different programming languages to all communicate with each other because they depend on the syntax being standardized. So what does XML look like? Well, here's an example of some XML provided by the W3C Schools website. And in it, you can see a number of different things. You can see that there are tags, those things that are enclosed within the angle brackets. You can see a special kind of line at the beginning of the file. You can see some indenting there. You can see some color as well. So XML is just a text format. And so this is all just text in a text file. The color coding isn't part of the format. The color coding was added by the editor that I captured here to help see the different parts of the file. You can see that this appears to be some kind of an email or note application. You can just see that without knowing anything about XML because there's something that says to and from. There's a heading, which looks like maybe a subject line, and then a body. And that's all enclosed within this note. So there's some slashes and things that are a little bit unclear, but at the end of the day, you can see that an XML file can be read just like any other text document, and that there's some meaning that's embedded in it that doesn't need doesn't need anything elaborate necessarily to be able to read. So let's break down those different bits a little bit in a second. So as we said, XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, and the reason it was designed because like SGML and HTML, it was designed to try and separate the data from the display of the data. And XML was created alongside HTML. As people began developing HTML, XML was designed as a kind of purer form of HTML, a version of data structuring language that was very clean and didn't have any legacy baggage associated with it. Sort of the pure form, the Platonic ideal of HTML, perhaps. In XML, the tags are not predefined. So those things we saw like note, from, to, those aren't predefined. Those are just used within the body of the XML. And you, as someone who's writing an XML document, are free to define your own tags as you need them. XML, by virtue of having these tags, was designed to be self-descriptive, meaning that you could understand some of the meaning of a document just by looking at the text itself. Now, XML and HTML are different, though. XML was designed to transport and store data, and it looks like HTML, but the focus is really on what the data is. HTML originally was focused on how the data looks, and typically it's considered as broken XML. XHTML is a kind of HTML that conforms to the XML standard. So it's a merger of both of them. You can think about it in terms of a Venn diagram like this. HTML encompasses one whole set of files, and XML a slightly different set of files. Some of those files are both HTML and XML, and those files that are called XHTML files. It's important to point out that XML doesn't do anything by itself. It is just a data format. If you want to do anything with XML, you need to write a program that's going to manipulate the data or to search the data, to display the data, to change the data, etc. And in fact, many programs have already been written that do this. And even though the data appears to be associated with the task, for example, our note data, it's still just data. So, in summary, for this introduction to HTML, you should know that XML and HTML co-evolved next to each other. At various points, they've attempted to be merged together, for example, as XHTML, but HTML5 continued in its development and doesn't strictly conform to the XML standard anymore. HTML primarily was made by web authors who were trying to solve problems quickly, and XML is a more rigorous description of the language that was being developed that formalizes these ideas of tags based on data representation. Let's dig into this a little bit more in another lecture coming. Thank you.